Hey guys, welcome to Disruptors, the podcast where we get the most interesting folks focused on the future and making it more awesome. Today we've definitely got one of them, George Dvorsky, on the program. George is a futurist, he's a transhumanist, and a little bit into the paleo health as well. He's an interesting all-around guy. Thanks for coming today, George.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
So you have a diverse background that seems to come from science, a little bit of fiction, probably a little bit of fantasy. What's your story? How did you become this guy?
Yeah, it's kind of a convoluted path, but I mean, many of our lives don't take a straight direction towards our destinations or towards our goals, but it's all good. I think it really kind of serves to make us who we are. My academic background happens to be in virtually nothing that concerns me today, but that's not even entirely fair. I studied history at university, but and even there, the history that I studied had to deal with philosophy and political science. I was fascinated with 20th century history, particularly the rise of totalitarian thinking. So, and I was very interested in the Soviet Union. But and I also had an interest in the history of science. So I was interested to see the progression of thought, to understand where the breakthroughs were coming from and what led to certain lines of thinking. Darwin, in particular, was hugely fascinating to me, and just seeing how his ideas spread or really didn't spread. Unlike ideas of Einstein and others, which really took off immediately and gained immediate traction. Darwin's ideas have taken much longer to take root, and it has to do with, I guess, the nature of what he was describing, which was the human origins, and that has obviously a lot of metaphysical conflicts. But after university, as I like to joke now, I spent the first part of my academic career looking backwards in time. I then kind of shifted my focus and started looking to the future. But the reason why I said earlier that we take all the baggage with us as we progress through life. I don't think that I would be half the futurist I am today if it wasn't for my the history and my just this sense of linearity, the sense of human progression over time. That in order to be able to look forward, you have to be able to understand where we came from. And I think a lot of futurists actually lack this kind of this sense of historicity. That and actually in two different ways. One, it can make some individuals think that that there aren't that the possibilities aren't as profound as they actually are, or alternately that it's going to take that it's going to come too quickly or too slowly. So or even non-futurists just feeling without a sense of history, they may not even feel that a sense of change is even possible. And I think really now, perhaps more than any other time I think in my life, it wasn't like this even 5, 10, 15 years ago when I first started getting involved in futurism, is this weird presentism that has taken root. There's a sense right now of the current moment is somehow exceptional in human history, and that's far from the fact. Let's take the president of the United States, for example. I mean, obviously I'm not a fan, but I recognize that this is perhaps one of the more problematic presidents that the United States has had to endure. Yet at the same time, hearing the hysteria saying that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to the United States, it's like, just that the times have never been darker for the United States. I'm like, well, you don't have to go back too far in time to see that, there are, equally dark precedents, whether it been the Nixon era and the Vietnam era, or even, what went on during the Second World War and how people struggled back then. I think that there's this kind of this feeling of, I don't know, this stasis, or this kind of, like I said, this presentism, that people are having a hard time breaking out of this shell and looking perhaps to the future now, and thinking about different kinds of possibilities, that progress can happen, both technological, social, and cultural. I'm perhaps straying a little bit away from your initial question, but if you're happy to have me continue,
Straying
okay.
is always good. We're here to stray.
So back to your initial question, which was, how did I get to where I am today? So I back in around the year 2002 or so, I stumbled upon the writings of Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford, James Hughes, a sociologist, and a number of other thinkers, David Pearce, for example. These individuals, I guess, self-professed transhumanists, which was a word I'd never heard before. But when I started to become accustomed to the writing and learn about what they were saying, it was like, oh, this absolutely makes sense. Of course, we're going to do this. Of course, we're going to apply technologies to ourselves. We're going to change who we are. We're going to take the reins of evolution and mold ourselves into, whatever we desire. But not even just that kind of like that transhumanist utopian aspect of it. I just saw the medical necessity of it. I saw transhumanism. So like the things like the application of cybernetics or nanotechnology, information technology, all these kind of emerging and converging elements. That this is where the future of medicine is going. Even things like the prospect of radical life extension. Is that a transhumanist fantasy, or is that just, again, the logical progression of the medical sciences? So, and I also looked at it from a very practical standpoint as a result. So, as my colleague James Hughes liked to say, it's arguing against transhumanism in some ways like arguing against the plow. Like it's going to happen. Like, so for me, wanting to get involved in this community was so that I could at least have a sense of some kind of not like control over it, but just to be involved in the conversation and to get the conversation started. So back in like 2002, 2003, that time back then, to describe things like radical life extension and cyborgs and neural links and mind-to-mind communication and even nanobots to a certain degree, and all the things that either are now kind of in our midst or will soon be in our midst, was very radical thinking and very fringe thinking for sure. And for me, one of the moment of reckonings was a cover of Time magazine where I think if I remember correctly, it showed like it had the years like 2040 on the cover with a head with like a brain jack sticking out of it. I'm like, oh yeah, these ideas are now not just fringe anymore. Like talk about like mainstream, incursions of this kind of thinking. So back then, like again, early aughts, excited by these ideas and wanting to become involved in them, I co-founded the Toronto Transhumanist Association, which was a subsidiary of the World's Transhumanist Association, which back then had it was a very vibrant group. We're very excited and eager young individuals for the most part. There was a chapter in Chicago, for example, in California, New York, and we held conferences, and it was very exciting. Then I think it was around 2006, I was also involved in the founding of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, which is a US-based think tank where we describe exactly that, the ethics of emerging technologies, and I'm still involved in that group. That group is still active. By the way, the World Transhumanist Association, as many of your listeners I'm sure are aware, is now Humanity Plus, so it's still around as well, just in a different format. And then I also, at this time, I guess amongst the first generation of bloggers, I had a blog called Sentient Developments, and just getting all basically it was like a sounding board for all these ideas and thinking these things through, because the ethics of it all really interested me. Both the ethics of should we do things, but or should we not do things, and what were the what are some of the potential outcomes of some of these technologies. So I was very interested in that, and even some of the more deep futuristic aspects like uploading and living in virtual reality environments. I was also happy to speculate about that. And then around, I think it was 2012. In 2012, Annalee Newitz, the editor-in-chief of io9.com, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, do you want to write for us?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I wrote for io9 until I was moved from there to Gizmodo, which is a sister site, and that's where I currently write. So if your listeners are interested in more of what I have to say, they're welcome to subscribe to whatever feed or hit the homepage at Gizmodo, where I do write about. I've got a definitely more diverse beat now. In addition to these topics, I'm more than ever, I'm interested in artificial intelligence, both in terms of some of the breakthroughs that are that are coming on a regular basis, but absolutely when it comes to the social effects and the even the risks involved, and in the ways in which AI is starting to hurt us and set us back, perhaps in ways that are not not to our liking. But other than that, I do a broad range of science, everything from archaeology, paleontology, through to chemistry, biology, evolution, whatever. I mean, whatever's timely and whatever is, I think, of interest to my readers, I will hit. So that is, in an extreme nutshell, is where how I kind of got to where I am today.
So you basically do everything interesting about the past and the future.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that if really, I mean, if even at work at Gizmodo, I've got a pretty a good degree of autonomy in what I can write about. And as I'm kind of scanning the feeds and looking at embargoed articles and wondering what to hit next, ultimately it's like if it interests me, that's pretty much where I'm going to go. Like, and if I think, of course, that it's of importance to our readers for sure.
So you said AI. What's most interesting to you today, and why?
What's the most interesting thing today in AI?
No, in anything. Is it AI? Is it something else?
To me personally, yeah. I mean, this really captured my attention and imagination and my concern. We're seeing it evolve right before our very eyes, whether it be the prospect of autonomous vehicles, the specter of autonomous killing machines, and these kind of weapons that we're told are going to be on the immediate horizon. Even on our, even in our houses now, when it comes to these personal assistants that we chat with now on a regular basis, because clearly there are some forms of artificial intelligence imbued into those technologies. And more than ever, I mean, 15 years ago, I was very concerned about where AI would lead in terms of its catastrophic potential and even its existential potential. And those concerns have by no means been alleviated. And if anything, they're even, they're now, even, protracted in terms of my worries. So as the deeper and deeper we go into the future, the more plausible I believe are the concerns that these technologies can hurt us in some pretty profound ways. So that's really captured my attention. I get invited to speak from time to time at events, and I also make an effort to go and attend various artificial intelligence seminars and symposiums, and the discussions are starting to become extremely nuanced and very serious in this area. Give me one example. In August, I was at there's a conference in Prague in the Czech Republic. It went under the title "Human." I think it was called something along the lines like the Human Equivalent AI Conference, which was basically an awkward way of saying it's a conference about artificial general intelligence, AGI. And AGI is distinguished from other AI is that it's very human-like in its faculties. So you take like a chess playing bot, or you take like an autonomous vehicle, or any of those sorts of systems. Those are narrow or expert systems. They can only do one thing and do one thing. I mean, it can do it very capably. Let's take AlphaGo Zero, for example, which is it's a machine that can play the classic board game Go. It's superhuman levels in that particular game, but it can't really do much other than, well, in fact, it can't do anything other than play Go. An artificial general intelligence, like human general intelligence, can do a lot of different things. I can have a conversation with you right now. I can, after this, go downstairs and improvise dinner based on the ingredients I have in the refrigerator. And if I go outside and it starts to rain, I know to put an umbrella over my head. I mean, these are the kind of like super adaptability, just this kind of just generalized intelligence. And the conference in Prague was dedicated to this particular possibility. When will we develop artificial general intelligence? You had people come up with a whole bunch of different types of predictions. You had some are like the super optimists, many of them with kind of like trying to get investment money, or get try to maybe get undue excitement about their business plan or whatnot, their startup. Or saying, oh yeah, we'll have AGI in 3 to 5 years. Oh well, I mean, it's a sure. If I was to give my probability curve, I'd say I would say it's not impossible. I would say it's highly improbable. My own feeling is that we will hit this probably, I don't know, 20, 40 to 50 years from now. But the reason why these predictions are so important and why we're kind of so fixated on the emergence of artificial general intelligence is because the moment we have AGI, the moment we conceivably have a whole lot of other things, namely a whole lot of other big problems on our hands. Because in AGI, then the next day after AGI, you now have ASI, artificial superintelligence, because conceivably this system will be able to again, unless we somehow safeguard it, that's a whole other issue altogether. it should be able to modify itself and do this kind of recursive self-improvement thing that we're so often told about. So within a matter of seconds, potentially, after developing AGI, we could have artificial superintelligence on our hands, and then we're dealing with a technology that is beyond our beyond our control, beyond our capabilities in terms of being able to understand it, to keep up with its speed, and of course to be able to kind of curtail its reach in the universe. So we better get this right as we're going to approach this seminal period in our civilization's history. So yeah, that's why I'm so interested in this. It's just probably one of the most pressing issues of our day.
I find it childish and ignorant of people that say general intelligence or artificial intelligence can be easily contained. We just have to bake in the parameters. I feel like if humanity has learned anything, it's that it's almost impossible to expect unexpectedly impossible.
Yeah,
no,
you're right. That's what's called a containment issue, right? Yeah, you've got all these people have these crazy ideas. Like science fiction has dealt with it. I think Frank Herbert in his novel, a kind of more obscure novel, Destination Void, already sensed it back then that we're gonna have to contain it somehow. So I remember the plot of the story correctly. He basically sent a spaceship off world, and you had these AI developers kind of like build this machine in isolation and not even necessarily knew how to get back to Earth. And even more recently with Ex Machina, you had it in allegorical form. I don't think that movie was meant to be taken too seriously in terms of how our antagonist, I guess, was working on his artificial intelligence. But the idea there is it was super isolated, right? Like he was out there, what was it, in Alaska, remote setting, that there he could work in peace, and then the AI could not, breach the bounds of the setup that he had made there. Well, spoiler alert, the AI escapes at the end through strategies and through maneuverings that could not have possibly been predicted by the developer. It's not exactly how it's going to unfold, obviously, but the message of the movie is absolutely very well taken. That sneak itself through our systems in some way, because by definition, it is going to be, vastly smarter and more capable than us, and no matter the safeguards that we set up, it'll somehow manage to filter through. And this might be our naive view of the situation, and perhaps maybe in 15, 20 years we'll develop these amazing safeguards, these kind of like firewalls like from hell that no AI can ever be able to penetrate. But from our vantage point here in the year 2018, based on what I'm hearing from some very, very knowledgeable people, that's probably not going to happen.
Reminds me of the iPhone thing. You can't have a backdoor without having a backdoor for anyone. So if you want to interact with the system, you have to have a backdoor, and if you have a backdoor, it goes both ways.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's kind of the problem, kind of encapsulated, is that there has to be some kind of level of interactivity. Otherwise, what's the point of having an artificial intelligence, work for you? The other danger here is how are we going to get international consensus? And it doesn't matter what you are. If you're an NGO, if you're a startup, if you're like a well-established company like Facebook or Google, or let's say, or a government organization, or a military organization, how could you possibly get consensus from everyone to adhere to certain containment policies, even if you have stumbled upon a coherent and effective containment policy? Somebody's going to screw up somewhere. Someone's going to unleash this thing into the digital ecosystem, and from there it'll just set loose. And even by this particular point, whether it be 5 years from now or 50 years from now, obviously with each passing year, the digital infrastructure is more and more intertwined. That web is getting thicker and thicker, and it's reaching out towards more aspects of our lives. So with each passing year, the capability of AI to have greater reach in the world is only increasing accordingly. So yeah, it's not just containment in terms of having to garner international consensus. It's also any standards that we start to enforce when it comes to the development of artificial intelligence. We're starting to feel this today. We're starting to have the first conversations about AI regulation. Now, already though, and when I mean regulation, like anything's been regulated, like whatever industry it might be, we already have regulated industries. The airline industry is regulated, for example, as are other important aspects of our lives. So the idea that AI can't be regulated or shouldn't be regulated, I think, is kind of a facile and reactionary view. Yet that voice is being promulgated. Let's take Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook. He has openly spoken against the regulation of AI, saying it's premature, not necessary. And as is so often the case in these corporate realms, the philosophy there is that we don't need government to put their hands on this issue to constrain us. We got this. We as an industry will self-regulate. We will make sure that we'll take care of our own backyard. Which again, I find that laughable.
Especially from Zuckerberg.
Especially from Zuckerberg, who the problem with Zuckerberg as well, unlike other movers and shakers. Let's take Elon Musk just as an example. He doesn't really get the AI problem. Like when you actually listen to him and you actually kind of pay attention to what he's saying, I feel it's way over his head yet, which is shocking to me. Because someone, as supposedly as bright as he is and as inquisitive as he is, and somebody who's so invested in technology would understand the implications. But maybe it's a classic case of an ostrich with his head, buried deep underground. Thankfully, we do have the likes of Elon Musk. Unfortunately, Stephen Hawking has passed away. He was a very great voice in this regard. Bill Gates gets it. They listen to Bill Gates. He understands the catastrophic and existential potential for these and other technologies. So there are some voices that are super mainstream, but not just even mainstream, but super credible voices that people take seriously. Because you also have a lot of academics talking about this as well. But that to the larger public, who cares what some nerd said in Oxford University? But when you have the leaders of industry, for example, start to warn against these prospects, where they actually we're actually telling that maybe our profit line, at the end of the day, it needs to be maybe curtailed a little bit because we need to develop an entirely new model of developing a safe system, or to have regulations that say you can't do this. Which really what we're saying with regulations is a combination of like, you can't do this, you can't make a system do that, or you must make a system do this, that, and the other thing, or you have to follow these sorts of prescriptions to developing it. Basically, sets of rules to make AI safe, accessible, unbiased.
Isn't that impossible though? It's a winner-take-all scenario with the tragedy of the commons. So it means if one team can invent AI and AGI and theoretically break some of the rules, if they're going to win every game, it means it's like racing your car without brakes.
I don't deny that this is going to be an immense problem of coordination and cooperation. Absolutely. I think what we can do though is maybe compartmentalize it a little bit and break it down into small chunks. So, for example, when we say AI regulation, we don't mean anybody and everyone who's working on AI. That makes no sense. But let's say you're working on autonomous vehicles, for example. That's constrained enough such that we can now start to set some guidelines for how they do what they do. So let's take autonomous vehicles. Let's say we have a future Uber fleet or a future Lyft fleet, and completely autonomous, which is where these companies seem to be want to go. They don't seem to be interested in having drivers. So this means that you're going to have a fleet of autonomous vehicles that are, conceivably going to be controlled from a central computer or central system. Now imagine if somebody hacks into this system, and they would actually now potentially have control over the entire fleet. They could now send them on kamikaze missions, or to harm individuals, or just to behave in some squirrely ways. But undeniably, if we're talking about the control of thousands of vehicles or tens of thousands of vehicles, that you now have some real potential catastrophes in your midst. So I bring only this up as an example that there have to be some absolute rigid standards for the security of this system, because we're talking about the potential for harm on a mass scale is significant. I'm not sure that's the best example, but I mean, let's take personal assistants like Siri, Alexa, Google Home, that sort of thing. Again, right now, completely Wild West. It's a joke. I can walk into your house. I can see that you have, let's say you have, just for the sake of argument, you have Amazon's Echo. And let's say you've got it configured with your credit card and you've got your Amazon Prime account and all that. I can just walk into your house and I know, but all I have to do is say, Alexa, order, 10 packages of diapers and 20 cases of Coca-Cola, and and then deliver to my house by tomorrow. That in other words, there's no security. It's just a bit of a joke. it can't be that way. Like security has to be, and people have been saying this for decades now. Really, is security has to be the first and foremost thing on your mind when you're developing any kind of technology like this, and not an afterthought. So back to kind of your concern, which was like how can regulations even be possible? Again, like I said, maybe break it down into small steps, small issues, one prescription at a time, and get as much agreement as you can on it, and then see if it works. Obviously, if it doesn't work, if it's costing way too much money, or if it's putting too many people out, then maybe let's kind of refine it a little bit and find ways to make it work. But I don't believe that we should just throw our hands up in despair and say that AI regulation, broken down to its subsets, is an intractable problem.
What about mutually assured destruction? We say, if we find out you're developing AI, we'll bomb your factory, we'll bomb your city, and we'll destroy it. Is that plausibly the only way to do it?
Are we talking like nation states? Like, let's say China.
Let's say China does it. You blow China off the map. Let's say Singapore does it. Let's say it's a small team somewhere. You just blow up their factories. Like, is that?
Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of the only credible way to do it.
The scenario you're proposing is kind of frightening, because it suggests that it suggests a couple of things. It suggests that you'll have competing nation states working on their own AI programs, which is not outlandish. It's probably happening as we speak.
It's definitely happening.
Yep. Secondly, it's presupposing that there won't be cooperation in regards to the safety concerns and restrictions and so on. Particularly, let's say we're talking about the militarization of AI, which is clearly it's going to happen, whether it be an AI that directs fleets of autonomous weapons, or controlling the nuclear arsenal, or let's say more of a cyber, more like cyber attacks, which I think that's a very likely scenario. Taking down your enemy's power grids or other critical infrastructure. Like, why wouldn't you develop that if you're kind of feeling belligerent enough, or if even if you feel that you constantly need to stay a step ahead of your adversary? Not necessarily that you're never going to deploy it, but just that we need to have it before they have it. And I believe, is kind of a mentality in the U.S. very much, that the idea that the U.S. would ever be behind militarily on something is kind of like it's an egregious idea. It's like, no, it's not acceptable. I think that's one of the reasons why DARPA is then as freewheeling as it is. I think the U.S. Military does not enjoy that prospect. But back to your scenario, the third thing that kind of comes to mind is that there would be an acknowledgement by the actors involved that once a certain threshold is achieved, that there is kind of like a point of no return, where either they'll have to accept the fact that their adversary has this capability, or deliver an ultimatum of sorts that they must cease and desist. Failure to do so would result in like an all-out nuclear exchange, or some kind of all-out reaction of some sort. Again, I hate to say this, but your scenario is not terribly outlandish. And if I believe, I forget the name of the group that put this paper together, but they did say, it's already been predicted, that the development of AI unto itself, not even AI in terms of what it could do, but the race to AI will exacerbate political tensions and make these geopolitical tensions even more strenuous, and maybe even lead to these kinds of conflicts. So, but that, like I said, that's going to require these kinds of conclusions, if you will, in terms of the threats, which I don't think is implausible.
Yeah, it's tough. I haven't heard any good options other than we all talk about it in our friends and communicate well, and we've seen that that's problematic just with nukes, and nukes can't spread
unless we get our act together and do what we've been trying to do for hundreds of years, which is set up a strong international institution that can kind of help us manage these things. After World War I, for example, there was the formation of the League of Nations, and that collapsed because of World War II. But after World War II, we had the United Nations. But even before the 20th century, there were these ideas of global cooperative entities that and it seems to happen after a terrible thing has happened, like a world war, for example. So world war happens, or let's say the Napoleonic era ends. What do? We get together, we say, okay, whoa, that was crazy, that was insane, we almost we ravaged ourselves. We've got to create institutions to prevent this from happening in the future. And almost always that urge is toward this kind of more global cooperation. Like, how do countries shake hands better? How do we, like, again, after the Napoleonic era, for example, they agreed on the regular kind of having these kinds of congresses and conferences where if there was some kind of like a political tension emerged, you'd call a conference. Okay, everybody just chill, relax. Let's get together. We'll have a conference. I'll give you this if you give me that. We'll ease this tension here. You know, they were willing to collaborate and willing to negotiate, which is something that's completely lost now. And it's kind of like almost like today there's almost no give and take when it comes to what's happening geopolitically. And then, of course, after World War I, the shock of World War I led to the League of Nations, and then, like I said, then the United Nations after World War II. So what I would hope that I've not even a hope, a concern that would lead to a positive outcome. I've long predicted that we will experience some kind of an AI catastrophe, like a bad one, that's going to catch everybody by surprise. And I'm not sure what form that will take, and may result in a lot of deaths. And that might be that kind of like, oh my God moment. We need to create an international regime here that where everyone is on board to prevent something, even worse than that from happening in the future. As we've seen unfortunately, from history, we're not very good at sticking through with these things. Maybe the first little while we're like, oh yeah, we're totally into it, but then afterwards maybe things fall apart and we get back to our old ways. So I'm not sure what the longevity of such a regulatory regime might be, but I'm just trying to kind of maybe play devil's advocate to your cynicism, which is that maybe there could be circumstances emerge where we might find some kind of common ground at an international level to both discuss the prospect and do something about it to prevent it from escalating.
It's almost just as cynical to say we need to have tragedy before we can.
Yes, it is.
It's that, and it's part of it's also human nature. I hope that we can start to evolve beyond that. You mentioned longevity a bit. So transhumanism, there's a lot of different ways that technology is going in terms of longevity, human health, extension, etc. Which are you most excited about?
Yeah, you know what? Radical life extension for sure, and it's very difficult to talk to anybody about that these days without getting some kind of almost hysterical reaction in return. It's not an idea that is very generally publicly accepted. You're considered selfish first and foremost, grossly negligent in terms of what this might mean to the environment, what it might mean to overpopulation and the destruction and the taking in of too many resources and so on. But I think that, at the same time, this has to be taken, has to be considered, along with other technologies and other developments that'll happen, in tandem with it. So, in a world where we've cured aging, let's be honest, in a world where we've cured aging, I think we're going to be able to cure a lot of other of our social and cultural and political ills. And that, I've never been worried about overpopulation in terms of our elbow room. Like, we actually have a small footprint as physical individuals, where our footprints get large as everyone's demanding first world standards. The meat obsessed culture, the amount of energy we require. But if we can find ways to kind of like squeeze all of these things down such that our footprint shrinks likewise, then there's no reason to believe, I think there's no ethical, moral, religious reason to say that we shouldn't strive to extend our lives to an indefinite degree. So that one definitely is exciting to me. I think death sucks, and I think that the sooner we get rid of it, the better. Some other things, I'm really super stoked about the possibility of more meaningful levels of communication between individuals and groups. So this kind of prospect of mind-to-mind communication, and even the emergence of so-called hive minds. So you're already starting to see the first inklings of this in these neural interface devices and these computer-to-brain devices, where you already have had teams, for example, have had this kind of thought-to-thought communication between individuals separated by hundreds of miles, where one person thinks the word, hola, and then it's a kind of like it's non-invasive techniques, but an EEG cap, captures the signal. Then that signal is translated, sent over the internet to a transcranial magnetic machine that then causes lights to flash in the person's eyes, such that they can do this Morse code thing and decipher the words. I only bring that up because it kind of sounds primitive, and it really is, but it's kind of like the first stab at what's going to be perhaps something much, much more profound, which is more direct thought-to-thought communication between individuals, such that we will be this kind of technologically enabled telepathic species as a result. So and it seems to be in our nature to do this. Our technologies seem to be constantly about integration, communication, closer and closer, links, between the nodes that are ourselves as human beings. And it's kind of, wonder to think, like, what kinds of activities, what kinds of organizations will we have, in a world where we're connected at a much more intimate and at a greater level. So yeah, those are the two things I would say that that excite me the most, I'd say.
What technology specifically for life extension are you most excited about, and how long do you think you'll make it?
Yeah, so there used to be this kind of idea that life extension would be that there'd be a magic pill that you take and it's gonna you live forever. That's absolutely not gonna take that form. The way I see it unfolding, it's just going to be this piecemeal, incremental, a set of steps that will just lead to us kind of really at one point we're just going to stop and look at each other and we'll ask ourselves, have we kind of like cured aging? Because a lot of people are not dying anymore. In other words, it's not gonna be like a eureka moment where we have it. So it can be anything from we're gonna have suddenly we're gonna, for example, be able to replace every organ in the body through with synthetic, either through just a synthetic replacement, or through, let's say, regenerative medicines or any other thing that can keep the tissues that are in our bodies going, or whether it be a breakthrough like in terms of mitochondrial repair. Or figuring out the cellular replication problem, and harnessing all the different cancers that that ravage us. But even then, for example, we don't even know what we don't know. So we don't know, for example, even if we have all these things figured out, maybe at the average age of 175, for example, there's a new disease that happens. Because we all of our body parts don't age at the same rate, or all the various, let's say, physiological functions don't age at the same rate. So there might be something we don't know that, like I said, that starts to break down and causes death. So we'll have to find a cure, quote unquote, to that. But in other words, like, we may have people live until past 120, 140, 160, but then they pass away. But then one can maybe make a case that that's not even going to happen. Kurzweil and others have argued about so-called like bridge therapies, where for example, if let's take today, for example, like I was born in 1970, so let's say I live to be 100 years old in the year 2070. Oh my God, like 27. And let's say I managed to get, let's say medical technologies are such that I can live till 2080, 2090. I mean, by that point, medical tech should probably be sufficiently advanced that I probably will be, de facto, immortal by that point. So that's another kind of line of thinking, is the bridge approach, where it's just going to be this constant succession of interventions that are just going to let you live to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, such that you're just going to just keep on living indefinitely. And then, of course, there's even the prospect that I think is directly related to radical life extension, which is, I guess, the kind of like the escaping of our corporeal forms altogether, rejecting biological analog existence and leaping right into the digital realm, which I have my doubts about in terms of that whole continuity of consciousness problem. A lot of the schemes that I've seen, whether it be like, different brain scanning schemes, seem to imply a kind of destructive copying, where there is, absolutely, you've created this entity that's living a digital life in a virtual reality environment, that's got your memories, got your personalities, and is absolutely firmly convinced that he or she is you, but it's just a copy. That person was literally just born the moment that the emulation was started, and you, unfortunately, are as dead as a doorknob. Your consciousness has come to a grinding halt. I think this is a profound problem in both philosophy and in the neurosciences, And until I think I've really yet to read a plausible brain scanning plan that can guarantee my continuity of consciousness from one substrate to the next substrate. But that might be just my lack of education or understanding of the issue. Perhaps maybe hybrid systems can exist where we kind of have still retain certain organic elements. Some scientists on the fringe have argued that there are certain aspects of consciousness that may have a relation to quantum phenomena. And even if they're wrong, there are other similar thoughts that suggest consciousness is somehow rooted in other, I guess, cosmological phenomena that can't be replicated by streams of ones and zeros or any kind of digital paradigm for that matter. And that may be the case, but that's not, I feel, a deal breaker when it comes to uploading, because the way I look at it is the fact of the matter is this thing in my skull, it is performing those necessary functions. I am conscious. I know that I know for sure. That's one thing Descartes was also very sure of. I do know for sure that I am conscious. So therefore my brain must be capable of this capacity that is consciousness. Yet this remarkable thing in my head arose through these processes of natural selection. It is made of the stuff that exists in this universe. There's nothing magical, mystical, unknowable about it. Yeah, it might take us a long time to figure it out, but ultimately, whatever machinations are going on in there, whatever phenomenology is required to kind of make that happen, we will figure it out. As to how that's translatable to uploading and computers, we'll have to figure it out. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say, maybe not saying so well, is we will be able to create a model of it.
We won't know if the model is right, though. That's the big problem.
What we have to do, therefore, and I've argued about this, is we have to pinpoint the so-called neural correlates of consciousness. We need to have a test for consciousness. So in other words, we need more than just your word for it. I've kind of belabored this point for a long time. We need to actually develop a scientific test, some kind of measurement that we can just wave it over your head or whatever it might be, and it's gonna it's gonna go, consciousness is happening there. Irrespective of what this person or animal or whatever is claiming or telling me. So I would dare say I personally will not upload myself or do any kind of brain scanning thing until we've developed this measurement device for consciousness.
When I hear people talk about brain uploading, I think the same thing when I hear people talking about containing AI. It just seems so childish to assume that we'll be able to understand the brain to such a significant degree that you would be willing to jump off a cliff. And I mean, it seems the same thing as praying to a god and believing in heaven. You have no proof that it's going to happen, and no one's able to verify for you, regardless of what happens. I mean, if you want to get into a semi-uploaded consciousness, what about just putting people under in terms of cryogenically or in some sort of anesthetically, keeping people under and having them in VR? I think that has a lot more potential, or just hooking their brain into interfaces so they are playing in VR and you slow aging down. The concept of creating an analog of your brain, first of all, a lot of the stuff in your body affects your brain. Your brain is what puts together the senses, but I mean, a lot of your hormones come from your stomach. A lot of different things come from different areas. Yeah.
And this is what I was alluding to earlier when I referred to hybrid systems, that plausible, meaningful upload paradigms may actually require these kind of like dual entity, modules to them, like a hybrid system. So like I said, when we create the so-called model of the human brain, it may actually retain some biological, or what we would consider to be intrinsically biological components that then could be, let's say, connected to something absolutely digital. But they have to work together to kind of create that system. Like I like your example, which is like somebody that's in a coma, let's say, where you still have these biological components hooked up to a machine. I'm thinking something like that, but imagine like a super futuristic version of that, where who knows what that model of your brain might actually be and how it might actually exist in the real world. But again, I'm just bringing this up to show that it's not a completely implausible example. And just further to your point about cryonics, I know that a number of prospective cryonicists, their thinking is that they would rather do the whole brain. Sorry, they would rather do the whole body preservations rather than just head only. Only because they feel that when they want to be revived, they want to be revived as kind of like flesh and blood human beings again, maybe with some cybernetic aspects or whatever. And that the thought that their brain might, if they do head only, that there's the fear that it'll be this kind of destructive copying and re-emulating of themselves in a way that does kind of create this kind of continuity of consciousness. So I guess I'm bringing this up only because cryonics does present a possible, let's say, bridge from death to renewed life or reanimation, in which you can kind of perhaps guarantee a continuity of consciousness, similar to like when you wake up or you've been in a coma, or if you've had you've been put under anesthesia and where consciousness has literally been shut down, that when you wake up, you are still arguably you. At least you think you're you.
Yeah, you pause the movie, go to the bathroom, and then you come back.
Yeah.
So the blog is Sentient Thoughts, and my question is on the concept of consciousness, sentience, especially with robots. Do you think we'll get to that point where we'll A, be able to tell, or B, they will be conscious? You brought up that, and you can't actually tell, and I think that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick correction, it's sentient developments, but not that it really matters because I haven't been, oh, sorry, you're talking about sentient, not the blog, you're talking literally about sentient thoughts.
I was talking about the blog, but got the name wrong.
Okay, all good. But yes, that is something I think about a lot, the idea of conscious robots. And it's even given rise to some other, pet projects of mine. So, for example, at the IEET, I've set up the Rights of the Non-Human Persons program. And the reason why I set it up, like right now in its current form, it's mostly looking out for the interests of non-human animals that we deem to be highly sapient, very intelligent, very emotional animals that are arguably deserving of what I'd call personhood status. But the reason for even setting this up was because I was concerned about the same thing for future robots. And future robots may actually have, they may be imbued with consciousness as well. It would be artificial consciousness. Again, not to repeat what we've just been talking about, but it's still an open question as to whether or not we can create artificial consciousness, or whether we have to create it by some such consciousness as it's more like a re-envisioning of how the human brain produces conscious awareness. But further to your question, so yes, I think that I mean this is a huge topic because it could send me in any number of directions. But just very very quickly, if you start to have robots, if we start to have robots in our midst that exhibit human level intelligence and capabilities, and even a certain emotional spectrum, and that we can detect consciousness, like I said, because we're gonna in my future world we're gonna have this amazing device, this consciousness measurement wand, we'll call it. And then once we can confirm that that all these things are resident within a robot, then now we have some real moral considerations to deal with, both in terms of their personhood, what kinds of rights do they have, and what kinds of privileges are they afforded in our society. But before we get, I know you're dying to say something, but before we get there, and please don't forget your question. My concern, though, is more proximate to that. And my concern there is the steps that are going to lead up to this development. The kinds of work that artificial intelligence researchers will be performing in their laboratories, as they maybe it could be through could be through experimenting on animals. It could just be through hard coding. But the idea that eventually will create this spark that is consciousness, or maybe if I could be maybe more granular about it, a digital agent, let's say, a piece of software that now has the capacity for subjective awareness and now is aware of itself in the sense of sentience. It has other capacities for subjective awareness, such as feeling pain, pleasure, and maybe even some emotions like fear or happiness. You can imagine the ethical conundrums that this represents in a kind of like in a basic laboratory setting. The kind of harm that could be done to a creature. I mean, I almost pick any, like, I mean, the Black Mirror has kind of addressed some of these nightmare scenarios where you have these uploaded minds, where we screw around with their clock speed. We can torture them, by slowing down their clock speed relative to our clock speed. So imagine an experiment. It may not even be the intention of the investigator, but what they thought was maybe a 5-second experiment, subjectively to that to the subject being experimented upon, might have been almost an eternity of suffering. So that's the kind of stuff we have to be super conscious of, super concerned about, and I don't think it's going to be ever too early to talk about that.
And when society runs on robotic work, what happens when we realize we've created a class of slaves? Does the economy crash?
I mean, I think you're addressing there a very different problem, which is the whole issue of technological unemployment. I think that I think we are headed toward a very different economy. There's no question about it. The autonomous. I mean, we're heading toward what they call a third or fourth industrial revolution. I've even lost track now. It's apparently which industrial revolution we're heading into. But the automation there will both be robotic in terms of the labor that will be displaced, whether you're a factory worker or a bus driver or whatever, and that we see the writing on the wall of those jobs already. But we're also hearing, of course, white collar work will be displaced as well by artificial intelligence, and we're starting to feel the first pangs of that. And they're projecting that by around 2025, we're going to start to see some massive displacement as a result of these systems. And because the fact of the matter is, companies they will use these systems. So if it means they don't have to hire somebody and train somebody and offer them employment, all the benefits of employment and all that, minimum wage, whatever, if companies can have can curtail those costs, they will. And I can't predict how society will, the effects of that will be on society, or how we will deal with it. Obviously, we have dealt with economic catastrophes in the past. Look at how Roosevelt dealt, for example, with the Great Depression. We've never been the same since. Similarly, this could result in a kind of another paradigm shift in terms of our social and economic organization, such that we can continue to live and thrive and engage in that so-called pursuit of happiness. So I'm not pessimistic, though, that it'll result in mass torment and civil war and social strife. I just think it'll just result in a new kind of social organization.
I think it's a little bit of a moot point, though. So either robots take the majority of jobs, or robots create so many more jobs that everyone's employed. But at least for a long time, no one's going to be paying robots. But what happens if suddenly one day we realize they're all conscious? And half the society, whether it's half the workforce or all the workforce, right, is run by slaves.
If a robot is suddenly conscious, it's because we deliberately made it conscious. Artificial intelligence, its ability to do work is not tied to its ability to experience subjective awareness. So we're not going to create like factory bots or even accountant bots or lawyer bots that are conscious. They're just going to do that work that they're programmed to do. So the population of fully conscious robots will be, I think, of an extreme minority, unless we deliberately decide to do that, or they themselves decide to do that. Then we most certainly will have something very important to have to deal with in terms of sociological and civil considerations.